alone on Christmas night. I had always loved the idea of a quiet Christmas. No family drama, no endless chatter about politics or bad decisions. Just me, my thoughts, and a little peace. That's why, when my parents invited me to their noisy annual holiday gathering, I politely declined. Instead, I booked a secluded rental house in the countryside, a beautiful Victorian-style home nestled in the middle of nowhere. It'll be good for me, I told myself as I drove down the icy road. No decorations, no obligations, no noise. Just a week of solitude to recharge before the new year. When I first pulled up to the house, I was awestruck. The online photos hadn't done it justice. The sprawling, two-story structure stood proudly against the snowy backdrop, its dark wood exterior contrasting sharply with the white landscape. It was almost too perfect, like something out of a postcard. I parked the car and trudged up the stone steps, luggage in tow. The wind howled around me, biting at my face and hands. The owner, an older man named Henry, had left the key in a lockbox. "Enjoy your stay," he had written in an email. "And remember, this house has history. Don't mind the little things." At the time, I thought he meant creaky floors and old plumbing. The first day passed without incident. I explored the house, marveling at the antique furniture and intricate woodwork. The living room featured a massive stone fireplace, which I lit immediately, grateful for the warmth. The kitchen was stocked with basic supplies, and the upstairs bedrooms were cozy, if a bit drafty. By nightfall, the house felt different. The charm it had in the daylight faded, replaced by a sense of emptiness that made me uneasy. The silence wasn't comforting, it was oppressive. I could hear every creak and groan of the old house, every gust of wind rattling the windows. Still, I told myself it was just nerves. Being alone in a strange place could do that to anyone. I poured myself a glass of wine, settled on the couch by the fire, and tried to enjoy the quiet. Then the noises started. At first, it was faint, just a soft thudding sound, like something being dropped upstairs. I paused, straining to listen, but it stopped. Probably just the house settling, I thought. These old places had a way of making noises that didn't mean anything. But as the night wore on, the sounds became harder to ignore. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, echoed from the second floor. I froze, the glass of wine halfway to my lips. I wasn't imagining it. Someone, or something, was moving upstairs. "Hello!" I called out, my voice trembling. "Is someone there?" The footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. Clutching the fireplace poker, I made my way to the staircase. Each step creaked loudly beneath me, my heart pounding in my chest. At the top, the hallway stretched before me, dimly lit by the light spilling up from the living room. All the doors were closed, just as I had left them. I checked each room, my hands shaking as I turned the doorknobs. The bedrooms were empty, the bathroom too. Nothing was out of place. But as I stood there, trying to steady my breathing, I noticed something strange. The door at the end of the hall, a door I hadn't opened yet, was slightly ajar. I approached it cautiously, my grip tightening on the poker. The door creaked as I pushed it open, revealing a small, dusty room filled with old furniture and cardboard boxes. It looked like a storage space, forgotten and untouched. But there, in the middle of the room, was something that didn't belong. A small rocking horse. It was old, its paint chipped and faded, and it swayed gently as if someone had just been riding it. I backed away, my stomach twisting with unease. The moment I turned to leave, the door slammed shut behind me with such force that the walls seemed to shake. I screamed, fumbling with the doorknob, but it wouldn't budge. And then I heard it. A child's laugh, soft and melodic, coming from just behind me. When the door finally gave way, I bolted down the stairs, tripping over my own feet in my panic. The fire in the living room had gone out, leaving the house in near total darkness. I grabbed my phone, frantically dialing the owner's number. It rang and rang, but there was no answer. "Come on, come on," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. Finally, the line clicked. "Hello." Henry's voice was groggy, as if I'd woken him. "There's someone in the house," I cried. I heard footsteps and a laugh. "Calm down," he interrupted, his tone suddenly sharp. "What room were you in?" "The one at the end of the hall. The storage room." A heavy silence hung on the line. "I told you not to mind the little things," he said finally, his voice low. "That room is old. Best not to go in there." "What are you talking about?" I demanded. "You didn't tell me anything about this." But he hung up, leaving me alone in the suffocating quiet. The rest of the night was a blur. I locked myself in the living room, barricading the door with furniture. I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard faint whispers, felt the sensation of being watched. When the first light of dawn seeped through the windows, I grabbed my keys and ran to the car, determined to leave and never look back. But the car wouldn't start. I tried again and again, the engine sputtering but refusing to turn over. Cursing, I stepped out into the cold, hoping to flag down help. That's when I saw them. Footprints in the snow, leading from the house to the woods. They were small, like a child's, and they circled the car before disappearing into the trees. I spent the day trying to fix the car, to no avail. The nearest town was miles away, and the thought of walking through the forest, knowing I wasn't alone, made my skin crawl. As the sun began to set, I had no choice but to return to the house. That night, the whispers grew louder. They came from the walls, the ceiling, the very floor beneath me. The fire refused to stay lit, snuffing out as if an unseen hand were smothering it. And then I heard it again, the laugh. But this time it wasn't soft. It was loud, echoing through the house, coming closer and closer. "Who are you?" I screamed. "What do you want?" The answer came in the form of a single word, spoken in a voice that was both childlike and impossibly deep. "Stay." I don't remember much after that. When I woke up, it was Christmas morning, and I was lying on the floor of the living room. The fire was roaring again, and the house was quiet. My car was parked outside, the engine running, as if nothing had happened. But as I drove away, my heart pounding with relief, I caught a glimpse of the house in the rearview mirror. And there, standing in the upstairs window, was the faint silhouette of a child, watching me leave. I haven't celebrated Christmas since. Alone on Christmas night, 2. They say Christmas is a time for joy and togetherness, but this year, I wanted none of it. No family dinners. No awkward small talk with relatives I barely knew. I craved solitude, a break from the constant noise of the world. That's how I found myself renting a remote cabin for Christmas Eve, nestled deep in the woods, far from the nearest town. The house was old but charming. Its weathered wooden beams creaked under the weight of decades, and its windows, frosted over from the biting cold, looked out onto a snowy abyss. It was perfect for what I needed. Silence, peace, and space to think. I arrived just as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the snow-covered ground. The cabin's owner had left the keys in a tin box near the door, along with a handwritten note. "Welcome. There's firewood by the hearth, and the pantry is stocked. Be careful outside. This place has its history." I laughed a little at the ominous warning. Every old house had its quirks, I figured. I shoved the note into my coat pocket, grabbed my bags, and stepped inside. The cabin was exactly as described, rustic and cozy, with just enough modern touches to keep it comfortable. A Christmas wreath hung above the fireplace, and a tiny artificial tree sat on a side table, its lights blinking weakly. I lit the fire, unpacked, and cooked a simple dinner before settling into the armchair by the hearth with a book. The only sound was the crackle of the flames and the occasional whistle of the wind outside. But as the hours passed, a strange unease crept over me. It wasn't anything tangible, just a sense that the cabin felt too quiet. I brushed it off, telling myself that this was what I'd wanted. Solitude. Still, I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone standing there. Around midnight, I decided to call it a night. The bedroom was upstairs, a small, cozy space with an antique bed and heavy curtains. The wind had picked up, howling like a wounded animal as I climbed into bed. I left the bedside lamp on, its warm glow casting long shadows on the walls. I was drifting off when I heard it. A soft knock. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The knock came again, louder this time, echoing through the stillness of the house. My mind raced. No one knew I was here, and the nearest neighbor was miles away. Heart pounding, I climbed out of bed and tiptoed to the window. Pulling the curtain aside, I peered out into the snowy night. Nothing, just the wind whipping through the trees and the faint glow of moonlight on the snow. I tried to shake it off as my imagination, fueled by too many horror movies. But as I turned to go back to bed, the knock came again, this time from downstairs. It wasn't soft anymore. It was deliberate and insistent, like someone demanding to be let in. I grabbed my phone, but there was no signal. Of course there wasn't. This place was practically off the grid. My only option was to go downstairs and check. Against every instinct screaming at me to stay put, I grabbed a flashlight and crept down the stairs. The front door was locked, the deadbolt securely in place. But the knocking continued, now louder and more erratic. It wasn't coming from the door anymore. It was coming from the back of the house. I followed the sound to the kitchen, where a small, frosted window looked out onto the backyard. My hand trembled as I shone the flashlight outside. First, I saw nothing but snow. Then, as the beam swept across the yard, I saw them, footprints. Small, childlike footprints, leading from the woods to the back door. My stomach churned. No child should be out here in this weather, especially not in the middle of the night. I called out, my voice shaking. "Hello? Is someone there?" The knocking stopped. I waited, flashlight clutched tightly in one hand. The silence pressed down on me, heavier than before. After what felt like an eternity, I stepped back and turned to leave the kitchen. And that's when I saw it. A face, pale and sunken, staring at me through the window. I stumbled backward, the flashlight slipping from my hand. By the time I scrambled to pick it up and shone it back at the window, the face was gone. But the footprints were still there, leading away from the house now, back toward the woods. I should have left then and there, packed my things and braved the snowy roads. But something compelled me to stay. Maybe it was morbid curiosity, or maybe it was the gnawing fear that if I left, whatever was out there might follow me. The hours dragged on. The wind howled, and the house creaked and groaned as if alive. I stayed in the living room, the fireplace blazing, a knife in one hand. I didn't dare close my eyes. Around 3 a.m., the noises started again. This time, it wasn't knocking. It was a soft scraping sound, like nails dragging across wood. It came from the ceiling, then the walls, moving around the house as if whatever it was circling me. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice cracking. The scraping stopped, and then I heard it. A child's laugh, faint and echoing, coming from upstairs. I didn't want to go up there, but I had no choice. Gripping the knife tightly, I climbed the stairs, each creak of the old wood making my heart race. The laughter grew louder, leading me to the bedroom. The door was ajar, and the weak light from the bedside lamp spilled into the hallway. Inside, the room was empty. The bed was untouched, and the curtains were still drawn. But there, in the middle of the floor, was something that hadn't been there before. A doll. Its porcelain face was cracked, its eyes wide and unblinking. It sat upright, facing the door as if waiting for me. The laughter stopped. The air in the room felt heavy, suffocating. I backed away, my pulse thundering in my ears. That's when I noticed the writing on the wall, scrawled in what looked like ash. "Stay with us." I ran. I didn't care about the snow, the cold, or the danger of driving on icy roads. I grabbed my coat, my keys, and bolted out the door. The car started on the third try, its engine roaring to life as I tore down the driveway. In the rearview mirror, the cabin grew smaller and smaller, its dark silhouette blending into the forest. But just before it disappeared from view, I saw it. A figure standing in the doorway, watching me. It was small, childlike, and it raised a hand as if to wave. I didn't stop driving until I reached the nearest town, where I checked into a motel and locked every door and window. When I finally gathered the courage to look at my phone, I found a single new photo in my gallery. It was of me, sleeping in the cabin bed, with the doll sitting on the nightstand. I haven't been alone on Christmas since. Alone on Christmas Night 3. I never planned to spend Christmas alone. It just happened. Work had been a nightmare, and the thought of enduring awkward family gatherings felt even worse. So, when my friend Lisa offered me her family's old vacation house for a quiet Christmas, I jumped at the chance. The house was tucked deep in the countryside, surrounded by a forest of tall pines that seemed to whisper in the wind. It was quaint, in a way, a two-story relic from the early 1900s, with creaky floorboards and a fireplace that hadn't been used in years. Lisa had warned me that it might feel a bit eerie, especially at night, but I brushed off her concerns. Just some creaks and groans, I told myself as I parked my car and unloaded my bags. The house greeted me with a cold stillness. I turned on the lights, each one flickering to life reluctantly, and carried my things upstairs to the guest room. It smelled faintly of dust and wood smoke, and the single window overlooked the snowy forest. The old radiator sputtered as it began to warm the room. Perfect, I thought. Quiet, peaceful. Exactly what I needed. By the time I settled in, night had fallen. Snowflakes danced outside the window, the wind howling through the trees. I lit a fire in the living room, poured myself a glass of wine, and curled up on the couch with a blanket. A Christmas movie played softly on the old TV, but my attention drifted to the fire. It was comforting, watching the flames lick at the logs, hearing the crackle of burning wood. I didn't even notice the first sound at first, a faint creak from upstairs. The house was old, I reminded myself. Old houses creak. But then it came again, louder this time. A long, deliberate groan of wood bending under weight. I froze, staring at the ceiling. It sounded like footsteps. I tried to laugh it off. Maybe the wind? Or an animal? This place was in the middle of nowhere. Wildlife could easily find its way into the attic or walls. But when I muted the TV and listened, the sound didn't come again. Just my imagination, I muttered, turning the volume back up. Around 11 p.m., I decided to call it a night. The guest room felt colder than before, despite the radiator clicking and hissing in protest. I locked the bedroom door, pulled the heavy quilt over me, and turned off the lamp. It wasn't long before I heard it again. Footsteps. This time, they weren't faint or distant. They were heavy, deliberate, and unmistakable, thudding softly down the upstairs hallway, just outside my door. I sat up in bed, my heart hammering in my chest. The door was locked, but that didn't feel like enough. I reached for my phone, only to see that I had no signal. Of course I didn't. This house was in the middle of nowhere. The footsteps stopped. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaky. No response. I told myself I was being paranoid, that my mind was playing tricks on me. But then I heard it again. A soft, deliberate knock on the bedroom door. "Who's there?" I demanded, trying to sound braver than I felt. Silence. I climbed out of bed, clutching my phone like it was some kind of weapon. My feet were cold against the wooden floor as I approached the door. The knock came again, louder this time. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob. "Lisa?" I whispered, half hoping she'd show up laughing, telling me this was all some elaborate prank. But when I opened the door, the hallway was empty. The air felt heavy, suffocating. The single bulb in the hallway flickered weakly, casting long shadows that seemed to shift and move on their own. I closed the door quickly, locking it again, and backed away. That's when I noticed it. A single wet footprint on the wooden floor, just inside the room. My breath caught in my throat. I hadn't been outside since I'd arrived, and I'd taken off my boots downstairs. There was no way that footprint belonged to me. I scrambled to turn on the bedside lamp, but the bulb blew out with a pop, plunging the room into darkness. Panic surged through me as I fumbled for my flashlight, finally finding it in my bag. Its weak beam illuminated the room, and for a moment, everything seemed normal, until I saw the window. Frost had crept across the glass, obscuring the view outside. But in the center of the frost, A handprint was pressed against the glass from the inside. I staggered back, my mind racing. Someone had been in here. Maybe they still were. I grabbed my coat and shoes, deciding I couldn't stay in that house another second. I flung open the bedroom door and bolted down the stairs, not daring to look behind me. The living room was dark, the fire reduced to glowing embers. I reached for the front door, but it wouldn't budge. No, I whispered, yanking at the handle. Felt like the door was glued shut. Behind me, I heard the creak of floorboards. I spun around, flashlight trembling in my hand. The beam swept across the room, landing on the Christmas tree in the corner. It was different now. The ornaments hung at odd angles, and the lights flickered erratically. Beneath it, a single gift box sat wrapped in crimson paper. That hadn't been there before. I approached it slowly, every instinct screaming at me to turn and run. The tag on the box read, "To you, from us." My hands shook as I peeled back the wrapping paper. Inside was a small, ornate music box. When I lifted the lid, a haunting melody filled the room, the kind that made your skin crawl. And then, as if carried by the wind, I heard a whisper. "Stay." The whisper grew louder, overlapping with itself, until it became a deafening chorus. "Stay, stay, stay." I dropped the box and ran to the back door, praying it wasn't locked too. To my relief, it opened, and I stumbled into the snow. The cold bit at my skin as I sprinted toward my car, my breath coming in ragged gasps. When I reached it, I fumbled with the keys, finally unlocking the door and throwing myself inside. The engine roared to life, and I slammed the car into reverse, speeding down the driveway. In the rearview mirror, the house grew smaller, its windows dark and lifeless. But as I reached the end of the driveway, I saw something that made my blood run cold. In the upstairs window, a figure stood watching me. Its face was pale and gaunt, its hollow eyes glowing faintly in the dark, and it was smiling. I didn't stop driving until I reached the main road, the house vanishing behind me. But even now, hours later, I can still hear the melody from the music box, faint and distant, echoing in my mind. I don't think I left that house alone. Alone on Christmas night 4. They say Christmas is the season of joy, laughter, and family. But that year I found myself alone. Not by choice, of course. A snowstorm had closed the highways, and I was stuck in my late aunt's house, far from home. It was the kind of house you see in old Christmas movies. Big, wooden, and creaky, surrounded by nothing but barren trees and endless snow. I had planned to leave right after Christmas Eve dinner with my cousins, but the weather had other plans. They offered to let me stay, but the thought of sharing a single bathroom with 8 people wasn't appealing. "I'll stay at Aunt Clara's place," I said. It was nearby, and since she'd passed earlier that year, it had been sitting empty. Big mistake. The first few hours weren't so bad. I lit a fire in the ancient stone fireplace, strung up some fairy lights I'd found in the attic, and even dug out one of Aunt Clara's old cookie tins. It was cozy in a rustic, slightly eerie way. Outside, the wind howled, shaking the windows and piling snow against the door. The sound of the storm was unsettling, but I kept reminding myself it was just a house. A big, empty house. Or so I thought. Started around 9 p.m. I was sitting in the living room, scrolling through my phone, when I heard it, a faint thump from upstairs. I froze, straining to hear over the crackle of the fire. Maybe the wind, or the old wooden beams settling. Another thump, louder this time. My stomach tightened. I stood up, my pulse quickening. "Hello," I called, my voice barely above a whisper. No response. I grabbed the flashlight from the mantel and hesitated at the base of the stairs. The narrow staircase twisted upward, disappearing into darkness. I didn't want to go up there. Every instinct told me to stay where I was. But I had to know. Each step creaked under my weight as I climbed. The air grew colder the higher I went, and the faint smell of pine and dust filled my nose. At the top of the stairs, the hallway stretched before me, dimly lit by a single bulb that flickered weakly. Aunt Clara's bedroom door was ajar, swaying slightly as if someone had just passed through it. I approached it slowly, the flashlight trembling in my hand. The room was empty. The bed, covered in a thick quilt, was undisturbed. The rocking chair by the window sat still. And then I saw it. On the floor, near the foot of the bed, was a single wet footprint. I backed out of the room, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know what to think. Maybe I'd tracked Snow upstairs earlier without realizing it? That's when I heard it. A whisper. It was soft, almost inaudible, but unmistakable. "Come downstairs." I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The voice was calm, almost gentle, but it wasn't mine. I turned and ran, stumbling down the stairs, nearly tripping over my own feet. Back in the living room, I locked the door to the stairwell and dragged a heavy armchair in front of it for good measure. I stood there for a moment, staring at the door, half expecting it to burst open. But the house was silent again, save for the wind rattling the windows. I told myself I was imagining things. Maybe the isolation was getting to me, but then I saw the Christmas tree. When I'd set it up earlier, it had been bare. A scrawny artificial thing Aunt Clara must have bought decades ago. Now it was decorated. Glittering ornaments hung from the branches, and tiny white lights twinkled softly. A silver star sat perched on top, and beneath the tree, a single gift-wrapped box rested on the floor. My blood ran cold. I hadn't decorated it. I hadn't put a gift there. I approached the tree cautiously, every nerve in my body screaming at me to run. The gift was wrapped in shiny red paper, with a white bow tied neatly on top. There was no tag. I knelt and picked it up, my hands shaking. It felt heavier than it should have, like something solid and dense was inside. I unwrapped it slowly, peeling back the paper to reveal a plain wooden box. When I lifted the lid, a sharp, metallic smell hit me, like rust or blood. Inside was a small, rusted bell. I didn't understand. A sudden knock at the door made me jump. 3 sharp, deliberate knocks. I turned to the front door, my heart hammering in my chest. Through the frosted glass, I could see a shadow, a figure standing motionless on the porch. I didn't move. The knocks came again, louder this time. "Who's there?" I called, my voice trembling. No answer. The door handle rattled, and I took a step back. The fire flickered, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. "Go away!" I shouted, but my voice sounded weak, swallowed by the storm. And then the whisper came again, closer this time. "Let me in." I ran to the kitchen and grabbed the biggest knife I could find. When I turned back toward the living room, the front door was wide open. Snow blew in, swirling across the floor. The shadow was gone. The house felt different now, darker, heavier. The lights flickered, and the fire sputtered, barely clinging to life. I stepped toward the door, clutching the knife. Outside, the storm raged, and the forest loomed like a wall of black. And then I saw them, footprints in the snow, leading away from the house. But they weren't normal footprints. They were long, narrow, and deep, with claw-like impressions at the toes. I slammed the door shut and locked it, pushing the armchair against it. The air felt colder now, and my breath fogged in front of me. The lights went out. I stood there in the dark, the knife trembling in my hand. The only sound was the wind howling outside and the faint creak of the house settling. And then, from somewhere behind me, I heard it, the faint jingle of a bell. I spun around, the flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. It landed on the Christmas tree. The ornaments swayed gently, as if something had brushed past them. The rusted bell sat at the base of the tree, gleaming faintly in the light. "Who's there?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. The whisper came again, right next to my ear. "Merry Christmas." The flashlight flickered and went out. In the pitch-black silence, I heard the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, and getting closer. And then the bells began to ring, one by one all around me,